Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Reed's Read Spider-Man Crawl Space Edition. Please check us out at the spidermancrawlspace.com. Well, everybody, I'm of course back here, of course, to have a thing to review the most recent issues of Amazing Spider-Man 66, aka 960, by Justina Ireland and Andrea Broccardo, and of course, Ultimate Spider-Man number 13 by Jonathan Hickman and Marco Checchetto. So we're going to be on those today in good things and substance. So, what were the best parts of these issues? One part I'll have to, of course, work on there too is supposed to call into it. So I'm going to be very fair with these reviews here on both Amazing Spider-Man and Ultimate Spider-Man. So I think with that said, everybody, I think, and of course, it is time to go into, of course, the pros like usual with Amazing Spider-Man number 66, aka 960. So what are the pros, you may ask? Well, let's get into the first part in here. Believe it or not, despite this being about Spider-Man here, it's a very interesting thing. Is the best characters in the story, believe it or not, are Cyra, of course, as one of the Scions of Cyttorak, and Doctor Strange. There is a really kind of cool dynamic I actually liked about this as Doctor Strange is going through the different parts of explaining what has happened to Peter. Because, of course, as she says, I did it, I broke them and everything else, but yet there's still a connection there, and I don't understand how it works, and I don't feel how it works since Calyx, of course, defeated everything. There's some really good parts on that actually work very well in the story. I also do like some of the interactions here with, believe it or not, with Bailey Biggs here, Spider Boy, when of course, the fact is he's much younger, 10 years old, and not understanding how depression is. And of course, him knowing Spider Man thinks he'll just kind of get over it. It's a very interesting view to look at that from somebody who is, a 10-year-old like Spider Boy, and how Peter isn't kind of doing that too. So I did like that. Also, was very interesting as this depressed, broken Peter actually handles the criminal that ends up trying to take over the cash register, steal from the cash register before Spider Boy shows him basically saying, like, what are you doing? You have people here, we're victims of all the systems and everything, and you're just doing this what? To do this? That won't even cover gas. He's like really kind of brought into, but we're seeing a side of many people don't understand about that. And someone who has dealt with depression, it does kind of go into that feeling as we are, especially when the fact is we did find out Peter actually experienced 3 million fates of death for people and everything. It's a very interesting thing to see all that because, like I said, despite everything that's happened, and especially his encounter with Bailey and Lethal Shea, which I will talk about in a different little parts here, of just how much Peter is very broken. It is very hard in that piece, and it's a very hard piece to look at that time. But understand, like he says, what's the point? We're all going to finish. We're all dying. Like I said, this biggest thing he did with great power and great responsibility was the fact that when he failed, people died. It's a very interesting look about how that happened. It doesn't go too much, however, into that myself here because then if we kind of move on to it, um, as much as I like that, we kind of really run into the cons in this story here. One of the biggest things is of course, one of the problems is, like I said, as much as that was a very interesting spec here with Bailey, it does have a depiction of what it is and how Peter is, of course, even saying, because he even goes like, "Well, how old are you? 8 there, Bailey?" And he's like, "I'm 10. Don't you remember?" About how he's dealing with depression. It's like Peter all of a sudden forgets pieces. And I don't know if it's more of on continuity issues or just kind of doing the emotional big tech. I also have a problem with the way Shay is. Shay is actually does deal with a different piece of being nursing and how she actually explains how much she's worked with Ravenclaw and different patients, especially the supervillain part. But when she actually tells Peter, maybe it's time you go ahead instead of ghost me, actually get help and deal with it. It doesn't really work very well. Yeah, she says to get help, but as somebody who is sponsored to see the problems and stuff and is a registered nurse, why she's not a psychologist, she should see that Peter is definitely doing problems. I don't like how that is depicted. We kind of get with her basic saying, well, you know what, you need to see a professional, which is true. I mean, let's face it, you can go talk to a counselor, but sometimes maybe you need to get a much more higher end counselor, one to see the time. That is true. But the way Shay is depicted and the way Peter is on this, it doesn't really come very well. Like I said, problems with this. And the fact that how she's explained this and works about things about finally stop, but it's too late. And also about saying how, despite things we always fought because we always get lost. It should work as a little something to jump on Peter. But the fact is, as we saw earlier, he just can't see that. All the deaths and anger has really been a problem with them too. And the fact that basically Black Cat gets some, because as we find out from Doctor Strange and Cyra, he is looking for a deeper connection. And the problem is why it's good. And as somebody who's had those issues too, the fact that basically Peter gets back that connection because what? He decides to kiss Felicia. Granted, him and Shay were apparently no longer together when this situation happens. And as someone who has definitely done his own self too when he was in that low many, many years ago, I can understand why as depiction. But as we know, it doesn't really do anything. It's good for a few minutes, but it doesn't work too. And that's a bit of a problem because the problem is why are we getting the best out of these storylines from Doctor Strange and Cyra? It's an interesting characterization. This is the most characterization. We also find out a little bit about Calic's brother actually dealing with why it's like, why do I think, why do I sit in here? And we're getting better characterization from the Scions. Even when Kratos shows up, who's apparently been the big Hulker, is the next one here. The setups is the Scions have been much more interesting in this character in a story that does not feel like it belongs in Spider-Man. Because guess what? It either belongs to Doctor Strange, or as we find out here, Juggernaut shows up with the current X-Men title and everything, which is going to lead to the spin-off mini-series title as well as the conclusion. We got an X-Men storyline, which has been said many times, was kind of thought up about 20 years ago by the writer and is now over here depicting on that. And it's kind of wondering, like, it doesn't feel out of place. We could see Spider-Man involved in some way, but really, this should be either a Juggernaut storyline, a Doctor Strange storyline, or an X-Men storyline, who's been dealing with Cyttorak for many, many decades. It really doesn't hurt in the thing pieces. So I have to give this a D. I mean, there's something wrong when you're enjoying the characters who are actually not supposed to be part of it. It's called Amazing Spider-Man. And the fact that we're having this little problem with these issues with the supporting cast and how Peter's doing it. It's an interesting view on that, but this is not really how that's supposed to work. So I don't really got thrones on this. So I'm going to have to give this issue a D. I have not been really happy with this part story. 60 some deaths. Well, of course, the tie-in issue, last issue, and issue 65 really didn't need to pick it up here. Here, it basically picked up exactly everything that was left over. It was an interesting storyline, but in the long run, this just really, really just did not do much for the story. So I'm going to give it a D. So on that note, however, I am going to completely flip the script and we are going to go into, of course, Ultimate Spider-Man, number 13 by, of course, the Winnie Chilson's team here, of course, of Jonathan Hickman and John Chell. So, what we can do on that? Well, I have to say, get into the pros. First of all, the biggest thing here, which we've been looking at here, which is the, of course, piece on Richard Parker. We knew something was coming up. We knew that they were having to talk with the Venom and the Pico suit, and the fact that Richard ends up becoming basically the Venom Dark Spider-Man is a cool twist of fate. And the fact that Richard doesn't have any powers. And it's really kind of cool how they did it. It's a characterization that's been world building. A lot of people have been saying there's been too much world building, too much going on in the last couple issues. And then all of a sudden, boom, we're kind of thrown into all the thing here with the Pico suit, with Richard Parker, and then getting into what actually happened to Peter and Harry the last couple months, how they've been stuck in the subterranean world or Monster Island, if you want to give it an example. I mean, this is the ultimate universe. So it's kind of Monster Island slash subterranean world with the Mole Man, and the fact about how Kraven was able to catch Harry and Peter, and he was able to figure it out. And the fact that he's been breaking down, doing the information, that he's been keeping them as prisoners themselves. Like, I've drugged them, I've done, but I had to get looked into these people. And it's such a really, really good feel of how this is working because it really shows this Kraven is much more different, but also how this ultimate Sinister Six storyline has really changed. I mean, I was complaining myself. It felt like we were kind of getting a little bit of a spin here after the Kingpin sending everything up. But these things with the departments from the Black Cat of Jonathan, from turning highly into actually getting everything here and the characterization. See, Mysterio is brought into the fact that they're talking about this. The Kingpin doesn't know they've done this. The fact that they figured out who Harry is, who Peter is, and actually know about Gwen Stacy. To talk about the perfect family versus the one that doesn't have any family, has nothing to do. So it's such a great way to get into these bad guys. These are spins on three very classic Marvel villains, two Spider-Man villains, very well known, especially as Kraven, as many people have always talked about. The best thing he ever did was die. But this Kraven has a much more higher era to that, what the original storylines by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko were about the world's great dangerous game storyline. And we get a better depiction on the Mole Man about how he's setting up, how he kind of wants war, but also how Mysterio is the showman. Like I said, he's the piece in his stuff. And I really like how he gets that piece. It even works with the current 616 that knows that Mysterio knows that Peter is Spider-Man, and I just really love how it is, especially when he drops them and tells them that as they said, we're going to work here. You want to be the hero, Peter? Then so we do it, and just drop it in the middle thing, and actually getting to see Peter without his suit. Harry has got his problems; he doesn't have a suit. Meanwhile, Peter, with all the different powers of a spider thing, he kind of goes into the fact that he's able to take out the Raptor. He's able to think. It's really cool, and I like the fact we actually find out about the Felicia Hardy here going after Spider-Man because they don't know what is going on in the subterranean world over with Craven, Peter, and Harry. And here, Black Cat, Felicia Hardy shows up, and of course sends up there. And as the suit says, yes, this is a bad guy. Now Richard's got to deal with someone who's just a little older of us. We know Richard is kind of a early teenager, while May is kind of like age, so like 13, 14, and here he's got somebody who's only a couple years older than him. It's really got a really cool little effect, and I really like that so much. This has been just an incredible thing with world building. If I would have to look at any cons for the storylines, we did wait a lot of time to get to this story. I mean, there was a lot of buildup ever since we got introduced to this Ultimate Sinister Sink, why the Kingpin brought him up and everything else. And the fact is, why it was long built, we have to kind of get on to what is going on. Harry and Peter are basically missing for almost a month. The Pico suit was standing in for Spider-Man up till Christmas until Mary Jane realized it wasn't him. And as we find out to get this issue started, it basically goes on January 31st. So then that way next issue will be into February to keep that month counting. I mean, it's a very interesting take to get those parts and everything. And I think there was a lot of slowdown, but it was really good. I mean, the biggest shock here, like I said, we kept thinking about something bad was going to happen with Richard, and this little twist of him being the new this new kind of almost like Venom, which really sets up a really strange dynamic, and also the fact it gets set up with that. I think it was a twist we didn't think was going to happen, and it's really good. And I really am looking forward to next issue. This issue is so well done, guys. After what happened in Amazing Spider-Man, despite these minor cons, I'm sorry, this is an this is an A plus for me. I'm sorry. This is an A plus issue. It is fantastic. It's got the characterization. It has the payoff in the world building, everything. It's got action. It's got everything. And you just are ready for the next issue with the two subplots going on with Richard having to deal with the new Black Cat, and of course Peter and Harry stuck here being with the Raptors after them, with Kraven the Hunter and the Mole Man basically ready to come after him, and Mysterio looking on. It is just a fantastic issue, and I cannot wait for issue 14 next month. This was good. I don't have much else to say about this. I mean, thank you to the team, especially after happening with all this. So great issues on this, and I am so glad I am reading this. So, on that note, everybody, if you'd like them more on our reviews or everything else, please go ahead and follow us at the SpidermanCrawlspace.com for most of your information, podcasts, and more of our other reviews. If you like this episode, think about liking and subscribing so you are never too late for the most latest issues and reviews on the Spider-Man, as well as the miniseries tied into this. So with that, and everybody, I thank you for joining me here for Reads for both Amazing Spider-Man 68 and, of course, Ultimate Spider-Man. With that note, everybody, see you later.